I like to use humor in my designs whenever possible. In the music business, if you have this like terribly heavy band, right? But they're also kind of a little ironic. You know, if you do something really cute for them, that makes it super weird. And you know, some people like have to think, some people get it, it works. You've communicated like inside information. So I like doing that all the time. The weird thing is that like I came into it backwards. Like I was a commercial artist first. I was just doing business first and became like an artist designer kind of like later and kind of by accident, right? So it's like, I was just doing my stuff for free, but to make a living, I was working like in print shops. I didn't start living off like purely my own art stuff till probably about 1991. It got to be kind of a big deal. And then the Rolling Stone article came out and then suddenly like all these commercial agents, because grunge was being big, I was doing all the grunge bands, right? So one thing kind of just led into another, but it was always a business first. Like people didn't start saying you're an artist till like, kind of like later. I grew up in Europe, yo soy español, and as a child in the 1960s, it was a very free time for children. And so I grew up going to the Prado Museum. There were a lot of really cool weekly comic books in Spain in the 60s, and then later in the 70s as I got to be a teenager, there were all the really cool European graphic novels. And so I never had an idea I could be an artist ever. I wanted to maybe, you know, try to be some kind of like scientist or professional or something like that. So I would just do stuff for fun, you know. I left Spain, I came to America and went in the military for a few years, learned how to solve problems there. And then, but I was still doing drawings for fun. And so luckily the Air Force stationed me to Austin, Texas, which was like this amazing place for underground culture. And so I kind of found my people and I got really, really involved in the local underground music scene early. And we had a little art collective and we would just make nonsense stuff and Xerox it and put it up on the streets. So local bands saw that, hey, can you do a poster? And then boom, it all happened. I became like the poster guy for a long time. That led to a lot of commercial jobs. I moved out here. I had a record label for 6 years. I went international, you know, spent a lot of time in Japan in the 90s, got turned on to the very early designer toy scene. I really liked the format. It really blew my mind. You know, it was I'd always collected toys. That's what I really liked. And so I decided to dedicate myself. It was a big change for a lot of my fans. A lot of people had a hard time accepting it. But now, 20 years later, I've done much more in the toy and design end of things than I did back in the music business days. So in 1996, I had a great big studio space and a print shop here in San Francisco down in a big warehouse. One day, these group of Japanese people walk in. And it turns out that like this guy was really interested in my posters because he was really into silk screening. So Japan is an ancient art form and he was like intrigued that I was using this ancient art form to make like this modern music stuff, right? So they're like, we want to have a show with your posters there. So in 1996, I went to Japan and did a poster show. And kind of like all these people came that were in that Harajuku scene, right? Shinjuku scene, Shibuya scene, all those cool people, right? Sort of hanging out there for a while. And they have, in Japan, they have these weekly magazines of what's cool. And I'm flipping through it and I see a picture of the Kid Hunter by Bounty Hunter. Are you familiar, right? The little kid with the striped shirt. And I was like completely fascinated, right? Because wow, this is like, it looks punk rock. It's a really interesting object. It's obviously like this riff on Captain Crunch. What the hell is this? Like, I want one. So my friend, I'm like, where's this place? How can I get one of these? He goes, oh, we know that guy. You want to meet him? I think he likes your posters. I'm like, sure. So we went to the Bounty Hunter shop, this tiny little shop. He had collected my punk rock posters and he was like, we should do a collaboration. So we sat down and we did a version of the rabbit, right? And now that silly design has, you know, I've sold millions of them. On this same trip in Japan early on, you know, I went over there and they're like, hey man, okay, American artist, what sort of typical Japanese things you want to see? So they're like, oh, you know, he's going to want to go to Fuji or whatever, corny, right? Well, I had really been into collecting Hello Kitty stuff. And I'm like, well, I want to go to Puro Land, which is like this really theme park they have there. It's all indoors. And they were like disturbed. That's for children, right? And also, that's like low class. That's just like for poor people. So I told them I have this whole rap about what Hello Kitty is and all this weird. And they're like, well, if you think it's so cool, maybe you should make your own character. And we were kind of like drunk or whatever, right? And so I'm like, well, what if she has like a secret boyfriend, like the booty call guy that just, you know, he's hot, but he's kind of like a sleaze, and she can call him up whenever, you know, because Dear Daniel's like not that hot, right? So, although she will marry Dear Daniel at some point because he'll be a good father, but. So I drew this little dirty little rabbit, and they're like, oh, actually, that's pretty cool. And then I started just, I'm like, well, I'll try, right? I want my own Hello Kitty type thing, and it actually worked. The first one was produced by Bounty Hunter, and then Medicom started in Japan, and so I did, I think, like 5 projects with Medicom. I did the Blue Bear bricks. I did some small Kubrick toys of the Labbit. I did a Labbit that comes apart, has anatomy inside, so I did the first anatomy art toy. Some big stuffed ones, a Mickey Mouse, a big wild brain Mickey. So that was maybe around 2002, that was all, you know, so this is like 2002, all that sort of happened, right? So then what happened was this guy called Paul Budnitz and a friend of his, Jeremy, who, they started this thing called Sweaty Frog that was a website that sold designer toys from Asia. So they would fly to Asia, buy toys at retail, bring them back and sell them for double retail. 2 or 3 orders in, I get a phone call and it's Paul. He's like, hey man, I was looking at the receipts. Are you the Frank Kozik that worked with Medicom? I'm like, yes, well, we're starting a toy company. Are you interested? I go, dude, I gotta have 1,000 designs. Like, I'm into it 100%. So I got on in the first year of Kid Robot, and then I licensed designs to them for 10 years. And then in 2014, they changed ownership, and I made a contract with the new owner to become the chief creative officer, like direct the company. And that's like kind of the story of the toys. And we're still making Labbit stuff constantly. 5, 6 years ago, toys were in a big slump. Now everything's come back great, but things were in a slump, and you only had 2 companies. You had Funko, which is a really different thing, okay? And you had Kid Robot, and around Kid Robot, you had all the little tiny individual artists and makers, right? So it was like a little machine at the center of the toy scene. And if you took that out, they would all just, because it was like a lean period. So then I got this whole program, like it had become a real boys club. So I'm like, I want like 50% female artists. I want 50% female staff. We're gonna put like, you know, LGBTQ friendly toys out there during Pride Month. The toy designs have gotten happier. They tell stories again. There's a lot of cool new artists, a lot of Mexican artists. And it's showing in the marketplace, all the customers are happy and their sales are up. There's coming out of Singapore and Thailand and the Philippines that's just great, dude. It's like super clean sculpting, but it's based on street art. It's like a really, really good mixture of the two. So I like guys like Quix and Rucket. Quix is a Thai artist. There's a woman called Mumbot in Thailand that's really good. So, and there's a small handful of companies like Fab Slab and Pauber out of Singapore that are just making the wildly. It's the best stuff. So there's more and more ways to get to your audience. I think that less and less and less is going to matter that you live in the right neighborhood or city anymore. I think it's pretty much like if you're connected, you're there. And then, you know, if you have a thriving online business and you're comfortable and your orders are going up, then maybe take a chance on opening the store and thinking though that the online is what's going to actually pay the rent, and the store is to have events to bring in you know, maybe you get 1 or 2 new collectors a month. I think that model is better for the really core specialty stuff. Core underground art toy scene all this time. Part of what I really liked about it, it worked exactly the way the old punk rock scene worked. There's the same kind of energy, the same kind of like, we can do our own shit. Like we can make shit cool. Oh man, I saw your shit, and so it made me think of this, and now there's this new thing. You know, all of that thing is an exact creative parallel. So it's just been awesome, man. And you know, it gives me a lot of good energy. So the future of art toys, in my opinion, is a digital collectible. Okay, like not an NFT per se that's sort of wildcatted out, but something that's like on a platform with a community aspect and a tracking system. Like VV does a good job. They have this whole internal ecology. They have their own money. There's an enormous amount of activity. The activity on that application is easily 100 times what the activity is on the open NFT market. I'm pushing Kid Robot that way as much as I can do it. I'm doing it, right? I've signed with VV, for example. I mean, I've done my own NFTs for 6 weeks. I've sold 150 pieces. It's really good. And since they have the big licenses like Marvel and DC, I think they're going to get Disney. Everyone's going to go there. Oye, ¿qué tal? Yo me llamo Kozik. Un shout out a la comunidad de Boost. Ahí lo tienes.